Good evening, Oh, wow. We don't use microphones here very often, so I wasn't expecting that to be so loud. Well, welcome, either virtually or in person, to Prince of Peace Catholic Newman Center. My name is Brother Philip Neri Gerlomas. I am a Dominican friar. I'm part of the team that ministers to the Catholic community here at the University of Washington, and it's my great privilege this evening to introduce to you our speaker, Obianuju Ekeocha, Uju for short. She is an internationally acclaimed pro-life speaker and strategist. She's the founder and president of Culture of Life Africa, an initiative dedicated to the promotion and defense of the African values of the sanctity of life, beauty of marriage, blessings of motherhood, and the dignity of family life. Culture of Life Africa answers the assaults on these values with African women's voices. Consistent with her love for the wonder of life, Uju is also a specialist biomedical scientist in hematology, working at a hospital in the United Kingdom. Prior to her current position, she was a medical laboratory scientist at the University of Nigeria Teaching Hospital. She holds a master's degree in biomedical science from the University of East London and a bachelor's degree in microbiology from the University of Nigeria. Uju was born in southeast Nigeria, the youngest of 6 children, and has resided in the UK since 2006. Ladies and gentlemen, Uju Ekeocha.
Thank you. Wow, this is great. I have been on a mini speaking tour for the last couple of weeks, and this is my very last one. So pardon me if you just see me do something like this, because I'm just powering through it now. No, I'm just kidding. It's a real pleasure to be here. I think the last Newman Center I had spoken at was in Toronto, Canada. So this is wonderful. And of course, John Henry Newman, who this ministry is named for, is in fact very special to me, Saint John Henry Newman now, because I keep telling everyone, so that people will be jealous, where I go to Mass every day in the UK is his house at the Oratory in Birmingham. So we go to Mass there. Well, it's not in his house. His room was upstairs, and I go to Mass downstairs. So, so this ministry means so much to me, as we also see great work, fantastic work being done by Newman Centers around this country and even in Canada as well. So thank you very much for having me. We will be going through something, but I think the presentation I prepared is a little bit too long for the time I've been given. So I might have to rush through some slides, but still I promise you that by the end of it, some of you, or maybe everybody, will be more confident in speaking about aid, ideological neocolonialism, the African continent. So if someone tries to kind of, tell you something that isn't true, so you'd be like, no, I have taken the lecture. Because this may feel a little bit like a lecture. So this was what I was asked to address: ideological neocolonialism, the West's war on Africa's unborn. So anyone who knows anything about my work would know that for the last couple of years, a lot of my work has really been around this theme of neocolonialism, just trying to understand it, especially as now, a lot of people always throw around this term colonialism, colonials, So, and most times they don't even know what they're talking about. So hopefully you will then be the experts to tell them and put them straight. Good. So let's just start with a few basic facts, the reality of the African continent, because sometimes when I have spoken in various places, not in this wonderful audience, but in some places where people are a bit more hostile, they always attack me and be like, yeah, you're talking about Africa like it's a country. So I am from Nigeria, so trust me, I do know that my continent is a continent and not a country. We have 54 countries. It's a home to about 1 billion people, even a little bit more. and almost 3,000 native languages being spoken throughout the continent of Africa. About thousands of tribes and ethnic groups. I myself, I am from the Igbo tribe, so very proud Igbo girl from the West African region. Okay, proud to be from there. Let me just point it out. Many creeds professed, yes, so many of us, Christians, Muslims, people who are still devout and who stick to the traditional religions, but many creeds professed. So there isn't really one African culture. So pardon me when you hear me talking about the African culture, the African value, the African this and that. The reason why I do that is simply because there are really common threads that run through the various African countries. And so that's why I have the confidence to say that, because these cultures and traditions and common threads that we have are such that there is very high value attached to the sanctity of human life from the womb. We elevate motherhood. At least this is how I've seen it in the many, many African countries that I have gone to and worked at. So it's something of pride and joy to talk about a pregnant woman, to talk about motherhood. We recognize the dignity of human sexuality and no mistakes about it and no confusions about it. There is a lot of emphasis on the responsibility with regards to sex and intimacy. People don't just cohabit and things like that. There's a lot of traditional and cultural implications to that. Don't crucify me. I'm just telling you what there is in my culture. Okay, so we promote and encourage marriage and commitment. There is a lot of respect for parental rights, and your parents are still very much the ones in charge of teaching and directing their children as to what is right and wrong. So family, of course, will take a very central space or central place in our lives, because it's very common sense. In a place where you have a lot of struggles and challenges and with things like poverty, the family then becomes the all in all. The family is really your safety net. People are fed within the family, they're taught within the family, educated within the family, even in places where maybe people cannot have access to good education. Many times within the family, people start to learn from your family around you. Even healthcare, when we get sick, sometimes it is from the family that you start getting your healthcare before, or your treatment before anything, or even sometimes that is impossible to have any other way. So, but Africa has had many struggles and weaknesses, and these are presented in the various moving parts. Our economy, from one African country to the next, we do have serious problems, and a lot of it will be connected to the fact that we do have these people in charge, some of our African leaders who are not transparent at all, and indeed, in many cases, very corrupt. So the economy presents a challenge. The political situation from country to country would be a problem. Security, I'm sure many of you have heard what is happening in Nigeria, for example, with a group like Boko Haram, with in the Horn of Africa and the Somalia region with a group like El Shabaab. So we're having a lot of these spring up across the continent. Infrastructure is a problem. The development is just not happening from decade to decade. This is over the years, and we're lacking behind. Healthcare, we've heard everything that happened even before the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. We were hearing about things like HIV, AIDS, Ebola. Africa was where we knew disease came and spread. Before COVID, we're now all the great equalizer. But before it was, Africa, Ebola, again. So we know. And these are all the challenges that have come upon my continent and brought about this kind of vulnerability and weakness. And as a result, these people come to us. And they look like they have some real goodies. Okay. The problem is, first of all, who are these people? They are nations, they are organizations, and sometimes they are philanthropic foundations, of which one of them, one of the most prominent ones, is right here with you, the Gates Foundation. So we have a lot of those coming and circling around the African continent, offering help. They call themselves partners. They don't even present themselves as donors. The only reason why we know they're donors is that each year they keep giving us money, and keep giving us money, and there is no real plan for an exit. So it's just, we will continue to be on their life support. So sometimes I get to ask the question, is this really philanthropy or is it neocolonialism? It is a valid question, and you'd see why in a minute. So humanitarian aid, let's just understand a little bit what humanitarian aid is, because I think that is the gateway to the problem of neocolonialism. Without humanitarian aid, we wouldn't be talking about this kind of ideological neocolonialism, because all of it comes in through this gate. Humanitarian aid, I put ODA there, because that's really in some documents, especially when you're reading fiscal reports and things like that, you would see it written ODA. ODA simply stands for Official Development Assistance. So you're all uni students, you should know the higher term for humanitarian aid. So you should be able to just say ODA. No, but ODA, this is what generally happens. In the year 2017, that is the last record that I have been able to track down, because it takes them many, many years to be able to track and tell us exactly what has happened with aid. They're not upfront about it. So about $146 billion were distributed in aid across various countries, and the graph looked like that. Looking at it, anybody would see that is an upward moving graph, and there is no real hope for it coming down, because from before the 1970s, which was when we all gained our independence, from around the 1960s, it was below 50 billion for all the countries that were getting aid, and right now we are almost at $150 billion, and so it's a graph that keeps moving up. Oh, am I going back or forward? So sorry. Okay, so who exactly receives the ODA? It's just these people, okay? So everywhere you see the bubble is where there is some kind of humanitarian aid that is going, okay, but about 150 countries, and the criteria is any country where the per capita income is less than $12,200 US. So it's not a lot of countries will qualify to receive aid. But what I'm very interested in is in this region where we have a lot of aid going to, because the African continent receives about $50 billion a year. So that means that we're receiving already about a full third of the aid that goes to anywhere in the world. So this is what the graph looks like. It's analysis of social sector ODA to Africa since 1996. So this spans over almost 20 years. And if you can see this graph and look at it closely, you would see that there is donors give money for things like education, healthcare, this thing they call population programs, water supply and sanitation, government and civil society, and other social sector foreign aid. So the graph, again, is upward moving, but sometimes it moves downwards. But what I'm most interested in and what I would like to call your attention to is the red linear part of this graph. You would see that everything else, whereas everything else keeps going down, and by 1996, when they started tracking this particular kind of aid, population program was the least that we got, but then as of 2013, God help us, population program exceeded everything else. So they were giving us more money, in other words, than they were giving for education, than for water. So more money being put to things like condoms, contraception, and even, yes, abortion than any other thing. And that remains the case up until now, if you continue to track it. So let's look at the landscape of legalized abortion, since they are now giving us more money for abortion than they are giving us for education. So you would think perhaps we have a lot of, legal abortion happening around the African continent. So here is what it looks like. Again, keep your eyes on that central part. And there are these countries that have legalized abortion, or what you call abortion on demand. You have South Africa, you have Tunisia, you have Cape Verde, you have Mozambique, you have Benin Republic. I put it in red because it only happened 4 weeks ago. These are the only African countries that actually have abortion on demand. Every country, we have 54 countries, and out of 54, almost 80% of our countries have still remained pro-life, if you like, but really will have very strict restrictions against abortion. So what exactly is this? We look at the public perception of abortion in Africa. In 2014, Pew Research did a survey trying to find out exactly how people feel about abortion from one country to the next. It was not only African countries that were surveyed, but I just extracted the African countries that were surveyed. In South Africa, where you have legalized abortion, 61% of the people who were questioned said that they found abortion morally unacceptable. 80% in my country, Nigeria, said they found abortion morally unacceptable. In Kenya, that was 82%. In Uganda, 88%. In Ghana, 92%. So almost everyone who was questioned said that they found abortion morally unacceptable. So why is it then that they are giving us, just think of that graph that I showed you. Why would anybody give us more money for things like sexual and reproductive health and rights when this is the kind of data that is coming out of the African continent? So, safe abortion initiatives, these are the kinds of things that we have seen just working from one country to the next, and looking at what our Western donors, these people who come with beautiful candies, this is exactly what they are doing. They had a project that was named Safe Abortion Action Fund, SAF, that was launched a couple of years back. Actually, it's now been up to 10 years, actually, the SAF project. So what this was a whole funding stream that was launched. It says here IPPF, but if you can read the small text, it says coordinated by IPPF. I don't know if anybody knows who IPPF is. International Planned Parenthood Federation. So what they did was for IPPF to come out as a technical advisor and a coordinator, and IPPF would go from one country to the next, getting money from the nations into this one pot. And that money was specifically reserved for safe abortion. And as you can see, this is from their website, and you can see the color of the woman on the website. You can see who the safe abortion is targeted towards. So there is no mistake about it. A lot of that money was going particularly to the African continent. And from my own experience, just having worked with a lot of African politicians and African parliaments, much of that money, the dollars and the pounds and the euros coming from these wealthy nations, was being used by an organization like IPPF to lobby the politicians one by one. So there's a lot of lobbying that goes on behind that. This is a much more recent one, actually, and I did an entire documentary on this. The documentary that I did is called, I forgot the name. Yeah, thank you. My documentary is entitled Strings Attached. Who writes a book or does a film and then does not know the title? Yeah. So Strings Attached is actually on Amazon. You can find it there and watch it. You can stream it. But really, She Decides is this campaign that was organized by one of the ministers, Liliana Ploumen, from the Netherlands, and again is very similar to the SAF project that I just showed you now. And again, you can see the color of all those lovely girls. It's really an abortion project, abortion-related project, and they have done, even in recent years, fundraisers just to raise money so that these kind of girls will have money for abortion should they need it. But the chances are that there's an 80% chance that these girls would actually be from a country where abortion is not even legal. So again, you ask the question, why? So, these are the people who have been ignored by the Western donors. I have been blessed to have been involved with a lot of pro-life marches. I think minus the pandemic, or before the pandemic, I had spoken at 10 different March for Life rallies or campaigns in 10 different countries across the world. And this is over just a span of maybe 5 or 6 years. So I have been very, very busy. But then the one thing that I find is that, say, for example, we go to March for Life in a Western country. So say like Slovakia, or I marched one time in Madrid, Spain. What I notice from one Western country to the next is that as we are marching for life, and I know any of you who have been part of March for Life campaigns, or which is probably everybody here at one point or another, as you're marching down the street, it is not an unusual sight, right, to find people who are spitting at you and screaming at you and yelling, and they're carrying their own signs to counter-protest you, right? This is the experience that I have had in every country that I have marched in that is a developed country. But once I go to an African country to March for Life, which has happened many times before, I always notice the difference, because as we're walking down the street, people are encouraging you, everyone. Once they know what you're marching for, they're very happy. People are welcoming. People are telling you they support you, there with you. Even sometimes people just join us if they don't have anything to do. So it's just amazing that I go there to do pro-life work, but you find out that the people even inspire you more, because just naturally the people generally are pro-life. So these are some pictures that I've taken at some of the March for Life rallies that I have either been part of or, helped to organize. This one was taken in Sierra Leone a couple of years ago when they tried to legalize abortion in that country because of Western donors who were pressuring the parliament to legalize abortion. They were saying no to abortion. I got this one in Accra, Ghana, and this one was in Douala, Cameroon, and this one was in Abuja, Nigeria. But these women and these, who are showing their own feelings and sentiments and beliefs and values are constantly ignored by the Western donors, who, by the way, know, because these Western donors, they do their homework, they have enough staff, they have the manpower, they have the resources. They could find out and do the feasibility studies and know what the people there already believe, or how would they welcome this gift. We're going to do this project. They know this, and yet they ignore these Africans. So all that I've talked about now is kind of what I would normally be talking about before 2020 rolled in a Rolls Royce. This was pre-2020. That's the ideological neo-colonialism before 2020. And we all know what 2020 means to all of us. Because what 2020 means to me is exactly what it means to you, unless you have not been on this planet. 2020 came, and they came with a very ugly virus. So things actually sped up with regards to ideological neo-colonialism, because once 2020 happened and the pandemic came, and from the very beginning, everyone was sounding the alarm as to what this pandemic, what it could cost in terms of human lives, in terms of livelihoods and things like that. So the African continent was not exempt. Of course, if anything, there was the anticipation that it was going to hit us even more, because it was bad enough here in the United States. It was bad in the United Kingdom where I live. The lockdowns were terrible. The loss of jobs and livelihoods, the businesses were shut down. And of course, people were sick, and there were all these things about hospitals and ICU units and all of that. So from the get-go, the African continent was a cause for concern, because already the donors who saw that the African continent was in a very vulnerable position, then they were predicting that things were even going to get worse. And this is one headline from the European Union Aid, which is an agency that kind of belongs to the EU. And again, we saw a headline like this: Africa needs help with its pandemic response. So we were seeing newspapers constantly just sounding the alarm. And of course, it wasn't long after the African leaders, who already were getting billions, literally billions of dollars in aid, they were even kind of more cap in hand, prostrate before the donors, saying to them, we're going to need more money. Because guess what? You know, if our donors are presenting themselves as our parents or our caretakers, of course, that pocket money, if something happens, we're bound to ask for more. So that's where the African leaders found themselves from the very beginning of the pandemic. So the vulnerabilities of the African nations, of course, then got magnified even before we were truly hit by the pandemic. Is just even the anticipation of it. A headline like this that says that in Zimbabwe, water shortages were going to be risks for new COVID infections. So from the beginning of the pandemic, we were being told, well, we're all going to have to be washing our hands more. You know, there were all these things. But in a country like Zimbabwe, and many other African countries for that matter, people were saying, but we don't even have water. We don't have water. So what are you talking about us washing our hands? There were people who were saying, if this coronavirus does not catch us, the hunger is going to kill us. Because what happened in a country like mine was that food supplies were cut once the lockdowns occurred. So people were dying of hunger. Food became too expensive for many on a continent where things were already bad enough. We saw also at that point in time that there were at least 10 African countries that didn't have basic healthcare equipment like ventilators that were supposed to be necessary in order to care for those who were badly hit by the COVID infection. So things were bad from the very beginning. So we had all of these problems: disrupted supply chains, shortage of basic needs, severe food shortages, loss of livelihood, humanitarian crisis, in other words. And so the international community, of course, came to our rescue. They responded. What do I mean by that? Canada, with 58 other countries, immediately rose and said, we see you, Africa. We see you, developing world. What we're going to do is we are going to actually do everything possible to promote sexual and reproductive health and rights and gender responsiveness as a part of our COVID response. So in other words, we are begging for food. We are begging for water, and they're telling us, hold on, Africa, we're getting you that sexual and reproductive health and rights that you asked for. It's coming up. So this was a statement they made in May 2020. So that was shortly after, it became known and well established that we had a global pandemic on our hands. So it was quite shocking for someone like myself, because I was thinking, when we had the pandemic, because I had been working on this theme of neo-colonialism, I thought, okay, good, finally we have a real threat to the African continent, that these people who are promoting sexual and reproductive health and rights and abortion, they're going to have to cool down. At least let's just save lives first. Let's get water to the people. Let's get ventilators to the people. No, but that's what you would think. What Canada just did was rather to give a huge, generous gift of $8.9 million. For what? For reproductive health services amid the COVID pandemic. So we weren't going to miss out on abortion at all. They were making sure of that. The UK government, what did they do in the response? They gave 10 million extra pounds specifically for abortion funds. They gave it to UNFPA, that then used it for a particular program they were calling the MISP program, and that had within it medical abortion. So the UK was giving us abortion when we were asking for ventilators. We had dire needs for PPEs, personal protective equipment, like just basic things like gloves and facial masks that you're all wearing now. In Nigeria, we had a headline like this from one of our newspapers. They're saying that even our frontline medical professionals didn't have PPEs. And yet, we were having entire nations give us gifts like gifts for abortion funds. So these were all the things that were lacking. And of course, everything was fragile. Sweden was not far behind the United Kingdom, because what Sweden did was to offer, in fact, I'm going to show you, because when I saw this particular headline, it says Sweden joins UK in funding abortions in Africa over life-saving medical equipment. I thought, what is this? I went to the original website of the Swedish government and I pulled up this statement, which was the statement that they made, because I thought, surely the Swedish government is not going to do this. Anybody read Swedish here? Because it's written in Swedish. Nobody? Oh, okay, I did this for you. So the exact statement that they put forward was extra side support for contraception and abortion equipment to counteract the effects of the corona pandemic. Yeah, that's from the government website, and that's a direct translation. It's incredible. It's incredible, but, you know, we laugh at these things, but it really did happen at the time when people were dying on the African continent of hunger and basic needs. So abortion also, something else that happened towards the beginning of the pandemic was that abortion became tagged as essential healthcare pretty soon following the start of the pandemic. Because as everybody was talking about, you know, essential and non-essential healthcare services, we're being told you can't come to hospital unless you're really, really, really serious. If you have a kind of surgery that is maybe an orthopedic surgery, you know, just stay in your house because we're dealing with more serious problems. So the World Health Organization indeed confirmed that abortion was actually an essential healthcare service. So that was one shocking thing that happened. But then it did give impetus to those who were funding things like abortion amid the corona, pandemic, like the Swedish government. So the UN experts, of course, from the time when we were all being locked down in our homes, the UN experts were saying that we need access to contraception and abortion. It must continue during the COVID pandemic. So these were all things that we saw and had to believe, but yeah, the pandemic did present a real opportunity for people who were already interested in ideological neo-colonialism, in pushing abortion, especially to the African continent. If you can think back a little bit to that map that I had shown you, really, most African countries don't have abortion. So people who had been trying to get abortion into Africa used the pandemic, the cover of the pandemic and the shroud of the pandemic to get abortion into the African continent. At the time, everybody was afraid. At the time, everything was uncertain. So these were some headlines that came through, so don't worry if you can't read fast enough. The corona is cutting off Africa's abortion access. Activists are pushing tax-funded international abortions. So it was just nonstop. It was nonstop. At the United Nations, something had happened that some nations were supposed to gather together all the nations were supposed to gather together in something called the Commission on Population and Development. They were supposed to gather and talk about this: population, food security, nutrition, and sustainable development. That was the theme that was for the CPD of last year during the pandemic. And then they couldn't actually agree on a text because many of the Western nations were saying, well, if we're discussing food security, we want abortion to be featured in the context of the pandemic. So, of course, many of the African countries and Middle Eastern countries said, we cannot do that. There is no connection between abortion and food security. And, let's just say everybody went home empty-handed at a time when they could have been saving lives and people were saying we're dying of hunger. Even at the United Nations, Western countries were able to block anything productive being done for countries where people were really dying of hunger. So it was incredible. Some African parliaments also tried to legalize abortion during the pandemic, and it was really because they were being well lobbied by the Western donors and those who have the real money. And these were some of the countries. Namibia did try they were talking about bringing an abortion bill in the midst of a pandemic, when only emergencies only the parliaments were sitting only for purposes of emergencies, but still, people were talking about sitting to discuss abortion bills. Malawi tried, and this girl tried to bring abortion through the Senate. Her name is Susan Kihika. She's a senator in Kenya. And she was proposing an abortion bill or something, the reproductive health bill that had within it, an open door or an open gateway to legalization of abortion. So Benin Republic, that I put in red, which is a small African country. All of you know Nigeria, right? But nobody knows Benin, right? Good. I could have felt bad if that was not the case. Benin is a small country. Nobody cares for Benin. It's the country that is next to Nigeria on the western side. Nobody knows Benin Republic until they legalized abortion. Then all of a sudden, the international community is praising them and talking about how good it is. Women are going to gain from the legalization of abortion in Benin. That was actually awful because that happened only like 2 months ago. That happened in October. So they legalized abortion, and under this particular circumstances, that abortion may be permitted, because if the pregnancy is likely to aggravate or cause situation of material, educational, professional, or moral distress, incompatible with the interests of the woman and or the unborn child. So you can actually get an abortion if you are trying to for the interests of the unborn child, exactly. So, so that was something, and they did it right in the middle of the night. The members of parliament gathered together late at night without any notification of the people. Nobody was talking about it. Nobody debated it, and then they just legalized abortion. And of course, that worked for the people in charge, because since then, France has been praising them. They're actually a Francophone African country. So that was terrible and devastating. International support in action. I told you about this senator who had tried to legalize abortion in Kenya. So when she brought her bill forward, there was a huge fight back, thanks be to God, locally against her bill. A lot of pro-life groups, a lot of religious groups, people were talking about it and analyzing her bill and saying, we can't have this. And when that happened, there was this letter that some people circulated, and they said it's 25 CSOs, that's civil society organizations, so that's a fancy name for NGOs, were saying they support her. So they released a 3-page letter. This is not the entire letter, of course, this is just the part of the letter that had the logos of the local, so-called local organizations that were supporting this bill, and they were saying that they wanted the bill operationalized, and they want they said operationalize the Bill of Rights and facilitate access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. So it was a letter from the get-go. From the first paragraph of this letter, they're already insulting the religious people, the patriarchy and all that. So once I saw that language, I got my magnifying glass, because I wanted to know exactly who these local organic Kenyan groups were. So I brought my magnifying glass and I started to analyze those logos of the 25 organizations that sponsored this letter. That's Planned Parenthood. Very Kenyan, right? That's Amnesty International. That's Center for Reproductive Rights. Their office is right there in DC. Another one in New York. That's IPAS. They're based in North Carolina. That is the She Decides campaign that was started by Liliana Plumen from the Netherlands. Again, not very Kenyan. That is DSW, which is a German organization along the same lines. So what happens, and this is just an example of how they operate in Africa, they all get behind a local politician. They get some fringe groups to be the front of their efforts. And if anything happens, they start to put pressure. These are the ones who are really, truly moving things in the various African capitals. The same people. And when anything happens and they don't get what they want, then they start circulating a letter like this one. This is only one example, but it's truly, really the blueprint of how things work around there. Eventually, thanks be to God, the state rejected Susan Kihika's healthcare bill that could have legalized abortion. Thank God. So, speaking of Kenya, by the way, because we just talked about Kenya, this is not directly related, but because it's Kenya, I wanted to bring this in very quickly. A few months ago, my friend in Kenya had sent me this news that was online. It said KEMSA recalls birth control implants that had mold. Huh? Mold on a birth control implant. I thought to myself, this is ridiculous. So I started reading just the fine print of this particular article, which was from Nairobi. And it was the a Kenyan government agency, the Kenya Medical Supplies Agency, which is what KEMSA stands for. They started doing an entire recall around the country, asking for this implant that was in circulation to be brought back. Why? Because it had fungus on it. And women had already been given these implants. So they said that I tried to find out who exactly. I thought, oh, is the Kenyan government going to be killing Kenyan women using, contraceptive implants? Then we found out through that article that actually this was implant that was donated by UNFPA, United Nations Population Fund. So, in other words, the UN gave to Kenya a large supply of contraceptives that eventually grew molds, but the problem was nobody even knows exactly how many girls or women who had had this implant. There is no record. So right now, there could just be women all over the country dying, who are sick, who have all kinds of problems because of this. The reason I put this here is that imagine if this happened in the United States or in Canada or in the United Kingdom. I mean, it would be a huge scandal, right? It's a huge scandal that women have been given donor contraceptive devices that could then cause them very serious health problems. But then nobody heard about it after this article, especially because it came from the United Nations. People should have been sued. People should have been sacked. But of course, this happened. It was swept under the carpet, like many other things that happen across the African continent. The United States, of course, has joined the international community who respond to Africa by exporting abortions to the African continent and other parts of the developing world. Because from the very beginning of this year, unfortunately, the new administration now repealed the Mexico City policy. And again, because I have to kind of rush things, do ask me anything about the Mexico City policy, and I'll explain a bit more about it. But what it then meant with the new executive order is that the United States would be giving money to organizations that promote and provide abortions in the international work. And it's organizations like DKT International, organizations like Marie Stopes International, which is British. You shouldn't be sponsoring them, but the American taxpayers are sponsoring them anyway through this new executive order, and International Planned Parenthood Federation. And by the way, International Planned Parenthood Federation has had, this is actually what it looks like when your money flows into their pockets. Before I'll call his name, before President Biden did the executive order, the International Planned Parenthood Federation tweeted this. They said, did you know that IPPF lost, can you count how many zeros? 8 zeros. It's like, how much money can the American taxpayers give you? So because they lost the funding, they're tweeting and crying, did you know that the International Planned Parenthood Federation lost $100 million in funding? And this is only, mind you, in a very short space of time. So imagine how much money is being given to these people. What are they doing in Africa? Are they building schools? No. Are they building hospitals? No. Are they building libraries? No. Oh, they're giving us water. What they're doing is they're going to the African continent and they are lobbying politicians. Where we see them is at hotels, and they are doing parties, they are doing retreats for our politicians, they're telling them about safe abortion, but this is the kind of money that they're used to from the American taxpayer. So you can see all those zeros that you're paying for. So of course, once the Biden administration put out this executive order, the first people to celebrate it was IPPF. Of course, they say IPPF Africa region welcomes decision by Biden administration to repeal Mexico City policy. Yeah, of course, if you have lost all these zeros, you're going to be very glad to get it back. So that was exactly what happened. And by the way, just before all of this started happening, just before, in 2019, before the pandemic, this same organization in Kenya had a huge scandal. What were they doing? One of their directors was actually, it was discovered that he was hiring prostitutes for his staff and his guests. And yet, with this size of scandal, the US government still deemed them qualified to get all those zeros in money to help the African people. Again, all of this swept under the carpet. Yeah. In a world where you have a graph that looks like this, a humanitarian aid graph that looks like this, like the one I showed you at the beginning, the donor is actually the master. They have so much power. That's why it doesn't matter how much we are begging for food or water. Somebody can still give $100 million to an organization where there's so much scandal. They are bribing our politicians. They're lobbying our politicians. Their director in Africa, the entire Africa director, is hiring prostitutes. All of that, it doesn't matter to the donor. He would rather, or she would rather, give that money to this particular cause that is highly ideological, that is more aligned to their own views and values, simply because they are giving us, they have us in a subordinated state. We see a lot of paternalism from these donors. Cultural imperialism is the order of the day when our donors are concerned. Ideological supremacy, I like this one so much because a lot of young people, well, even non-young people, talk about this thing. Mind you, I live far from the United States. So I'm going to say it. It will be controversial, but I will say it. Everybody talks about this thing called white supremacy. I am very, very far, so I'm not part of your society. But I hear it. It's online. Everybody's like, oh, white supremacy. I don't know about white supremacy, actually. But what I have experienced is ideological supremacy. It is those who think that their own ideology trumps that of everybody else. That you see those African women who are holding signs saying no to abortion. Abortion hurts women. We don't want abortion in Africa. Nobody cares about that because somebody is superior to you, and those who feel they are superior to you, and who indeed appear to be superior to you, have an ideology that they feel is also superior to yours. That is ideological supremacy. And we are living through it every single day with everything that happens, with every policy that is coming out from our donors, with the style with which they work, with the way in which they decide to allocate, everything they have, that within a pandemic, where people are crying and seriously think, a lot of people in Africa seriously thought they were going to die of, be it the lack of water, the lack of food, and people were in a desperate situation, maybe last year than any other year before. And yet, the ideological supremacists were given $9 million to sexual and reproductive health and rights, to whatever they wanted. That's ideological supremacy. That is deadly. That is dangerous. And that is exactly the order of the day when it comes to our donors. A lot of humanitarian blackmail. Yes, ideological neocolonialism. So that's it. We are completely subordinated to the person who is holding the dollars, the euros, the pounds, the donors who are sitting in Europe and America, who decide exactly what is going to happen. In Nigeria, we have, now he's passed away, but Chinua Achebe was one of our greatest literary giants. And there is a quote of his that I usually like to hold on to when I speak about neo-colonialism. He said, "Until the lions have their own historians, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter." It's very deep. A lot of our proverbs and sayings like this one, you kind of have to do a double take. I remember when I was young, when my grandmother said something, it's just never really clear. You have to think about it. But when I read this quote the first time, I had to think about it. Ooh, then it struck me. Until the lions have their own historians, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. In my tribe, there are people who are called Obuago, the killer of lion, Obuehi, the killer of like elephants. You know, it's kind of a praise. You know, it's a, I don't know how to put it. It's like somebody is praising you and they're saying like you're a strong man, you're a warrior. That's kind of what it means. But if you think about it, if somebody's name or, you know, your warrior title is like the killer of lions, yeah, what about the lions that you are killing? If you look at it from their side. So what I'm saying, in other words, is that our donors are really the ones who are in charge of everything. They are controlling everything. But I think what is even more dangerous is that they are controlling the narrative. They are also the ones that have the historians. They are the ones who are keeping the records. And many times, because of our struggle and because of our distractions and our own preoccupations, we're not really taking the records. We're not really taking time to map out exactly what the donors are doing. But for some years, I have thought to myself, well, I have got to be the historian of my people. And so have you. We need to take the records. We need to start putting things together and carefully and intelligently just start mapping things out. Because until we have our own historians, the story, this particular story is of this culture that we live in, is eventually going to glorify the hunter. Because then when the time comes, they are going to start wiping out the things that don't really align. Okay? But that's where we stand. That's exactly where we stand. Until the lions have their own historians, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. So let's be careful about being our own historians and keeping the records and just setting the records straight and never forget what is happening in this time that we live in. Never forget the neo-colonialism, the ideological supremacy, the humanitarian blackmail. We should never forget it. We should keep record of it. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Once again, thank you so much, Uju, for speaking to us tonight. Let's give her another round of applause. Okay, so just some brief announcements. Sorry, I'm not as tall as Uju. So we invite you guys to come check out our table over here. We are 3W Medical, and we are providing true healthcare services to women in the Seattle area. So please check us out. We will also be selling Uju's books, and she will be signing them. You can also take a picture with her. And we just have all sorts of fun stuff over here, so please check us out. And once again, thank you, Uju.
Thank you. Thank you. rather, are we having Q&A? And what would it be the setup? I'm fine to take any questions, or if you have the time. Or, so, okay. Yes.
Can you say a little bit about what the Mexico City policy was about?
Good. Okay. So the Mexico City policy has nothing specifically to do with Mexico. It's just that it was in Mexico during an event in Mexico that Reagan had come up with this policy that through the executive arm, the U.S. will not sponsor any organization that promotes or provides abortion. So what that means, in international work particularly, so what that means is that before the U.S. can give any funding to an organization, that organization has to declare that they don't do anything with abortion, they do not provide it, they do not promote it, they do not lobby for it. And if you do, you have to drop it. You have to show that you've given that up. So during the Reagan administration, of course, the Mexico City policy was very much in place. During the next administration, Bush administration, it was still on. The Clinton administration, that was completely repealed. The next Bush administration, it was back in place. At least I knew that because I was conscious of that at the time. Then, of course, during the Obama administration, that was immediately repealed. During the Trump administration, it was back up, but it was even because of the number of pro-life people who were working around Washington at the time. They expanded it, they expanded the Mexico City policy. So it became this whole policy about the protection of human life and health. And in full disclosure, it was very good because a lot of things we were proposing at the time, we were being listened to. The United States would not give money to Planned Parenthood, and hence that tweet. Marie Stopes International lost a lot of money. IPAS, they were even talking about closing up some of their offices. So the people in Nigeria working in some of these organizations, they were really running helter-skelter. They were, it really caught them badly 4 years ago. But by this year, of course, all that funding has now been released. And even I'm hearing rumors that proposals are being made. I hope it doesn't work. I don't think it's going to work because I don't see how it will. But there are proposals being made from some quarters to make it permanent, to make this repeal permanent so that never again can the Mexico City policy be brought back to life. So I don't know what's going to happen, but at the moment, the U.S. government is funding these organizations who were formerly defunded in the international work. So, yeah. Yes? Any other questions? You can ask me like really nice questions like, how come you're so good? How come you're so nice? Those are also valid questions. I love those ones the most. Those are my easiest questions to answer. Yes? Yes.
I may have missed this, but what do these donating companies or organizations, what do they stand to gain by donating and all these things happening?
Yes.
I might have missed that, but I don't see what it is.
Absolutely. It's an excellent question, and one that confuses really, because one would think, money is limited. Its resources are limited. And many times, even in your own country, in budget, people are saying, why don't you budget more? Because it always seems as if countries don't have enough money for the things they have to do. But when it comes to international aid, it's almost like money laundering. Suddenly we see this money is going out, and it's mind-blowing. What they stand to gain, I just believe, is spreading a certain type of ideology, destroying views and values that are more traditional, more conservative. When it comes to abortion, something like abortion and some other moral issues, as you know, those who promote it, those who are really at the helm of it, have almost a pseudo-religious zeal when it comes to spreading it. And it happens here in the United States, that an organization like Planned Parenthood, what value is it adding to your country? But it's the amount of money that it gets when you compare it to other programs and projects within the country, things that are getting defunded, that, because someone will say, oh, there isn't enough money, for schools in underserved communities. But there always seems to be money for Planned Parenthood. How is it that the United States government will have enough money to fund a British organization? It's not like the UK has run out of money. But why would you be funding a British organization? Because that organization says we're going to be promoting abortions overseas, or we're going to get safe abortions, as they put it, to countries that don't have it. So all of a sudden, they can lay claims to funds, not only in the United States. Germany gives them money. The Netherlands gives them money. They're getting money from so many countries. And this is not the norm. So I believe it's kind of that pseudo-religious zeal that those who are, in power, those who want to see a certain ideology spread, they want a kind of hegemony, if you like, of their own views and values. Yeah, I think that's what they stand to gain. So for them, they come at it with a certain zeal that they are ready to give everything possible to promote these things, even when they see quite obviously that the people they are sending these monies to for things like abortion, they need so many other things, and they're not even asking for abortion at all. Yes.
So does a lot of that donor money also go towards trying to change the values of the African countries? Because if they give like millions of dollars to a country that is like 90% pro-life, then how do they expect those people to actually use that money to get abortions and stuff like that?
Yeah. Okay. So the money, a lot of it doesn't go to actually performing the abortions. This is what we found out. As of now, most of the money is still going to bribing the politicians, because that's where they need it for people like Susan Kihike, the politician in Kenya. They need it to kind of raise a certain breed of African politicians, and they're keeping them and raising them. That takes a lot of money. That takes even more money than, the $400 per abortion they're going to spend, for example. So it's kind of depressing. But much of that money goes into these kinds of things. They're doing a lot of feasibility studies, so they know that the people are 90% or 80% or 61%, like in South Africa, pro-life. So how to get them? They don't bother with the people. No one bothers with the people. Nobody is going to tell an African country to do a referendum directly for abortion. It's not going to happen, because they know if they try it, we are going to make sure that abortion is completely canned and thrown away, aborted out of our society forever through referendum. So what they're doing is exactly like what they've done in Benin Republic, where they really lobby the 200 people or 250 people who are representing us in such a way that those people then have the audacity to then sit in parliament and vote for something that they haven't even discussed with their constituents who voted them in. It's very, very common. We've seen that in various African countries. Every time abortion is legalized, if you check what has happened in the background, is the fact that the Western donors have gone over the heads of the people, the overwhelming majorities, and they've gone directly to those who are in power. So it's a very dirty game they're playing, but they're playing it all the same. And because the African people, we are powerless in a sense of speaking, I think they kind of do it with all impunity. That's the real racism, actually. That's what I think. Yeah. Okay. Oh, there's many people. Okay, let's start from the back.
Do you think there's a connection between Planned Parenthood's history of eugenics with abortion and the fact that it's so wildly supporting abortion in Africa today?
Yeah, so obviously now a lot of these people, Planned Parenthood, and also coincidentally Marie Stopes International, Margaret Sanger and Marie Stopes belong to they're contemporaries. So they were doing their work in the 1920s, the 1930s, and even the 1940s. And they were both of a very similar mindset Margaret Sanger right here in the United States, Marie Stopes first of all in Scotland, but eventually I think she ended up in Manchester teaching at the university. So yes, abortion, the legacy of abortion, no matter where it is, whether here in the United States, whether in the United Kingdom, whether on the African continent, it is based in eugenics. It started that way. It has continued that way. It has been rebranded many, many times to fine-tune it so that it doesn't seem that way. So Planned Parenthood, as you know, as you may know, they're trying gradually now to separate themselves from the name of their leader, from the legacy of their leader. Even Marie Stopes International is no longer Marie Stopes International. In fact, during the pandemic, one of the funny things that happened is that Marie Stopes International, this British organization that is being funded by Americans, by the way, they no longer answer Marie Stopes. They now say they're MSI Reproductive Choices. So they changed their name just because their leader, we've exposed many times that their leader was writing these letters to Hitler and saying how she admires his work and all whatnot. So she was very similar to Margaret Sanger. So it's really something that I believe that because eugenics is very much a part of the root of abortion, even in today's society, a lot of the abortions are being done for the fact that baby is imperfect, baby is unwanted, unexpected. That's eugenic, that's a kind of eugenic abortion. It has nothing to do with the woman's health. It's mostly for the fact that that baby has to be eliminated. Yeah, so it very much, in everywhere where abortion exists, the eugenics is part of it. The founders have made it such that they've started off this kind of movement, which didn't even start with abortion, it started with contraception, but it is all really in that same movement. But yes, then when you talk about the African continent, where you are talking about eliminating the Africans themselves or reducing the number of the Africans themselves, I think there is something even more inspiring, if you like, to those who are pushing it. In the US, we see that locally when we see abortion in black communities, they will never admit it, but there are more black babies being aborted in every single part of the United States. There are more black babies being aborted by proportion in places like the United Kingdom. It's always minority communities, black communities. So it's something that we've seen over and over again. And sorry, when people say Black Lives Matter, I always just tend to shake my head and think, if Black Lives Matter, then you will really go and question the abortion organizations and abortion industry that is making a killing out of killing unborn black babies. So it's a real thing that I believe is playing out in Africa on a very large scale, because obviously this is a continent of mostly black people. But again, nobody cares. Nobody cares when the donor is concerned. Again, that ideological supremacy that is very much intertwined with cultural imperialism, unfortunately. Yes, okay.
What's the general attitude towards contraception on the African continent, considering in the American context there are pro-lifers who are usually Catholics who don't promote contraception, but there's also people who claim to be pro-life that say contraception is a way to prevent more unplanned pregnancies.
Yeah, so obviously we have many faiths, like I said in the beginning, being professed across the African continent. And yes, among the Catholics, it's very clear. Humanae Vitae is very clear. We know what the teachings of the church would be about that. And so thankfully, still among the Catholics, there is an understanding that contraception is wrong. But then in the background, we still have like the Anglicans, the Church of Nigeria, the Church of Uganda. Unfortunately, among those ones, there is not the understanding of Humanae Vitae, of the human dignity, of the fact that it's actually, there are so many problems psychologically when contraception is introduced into a marriage, or but that's a whole education, right? That's a whole theological understanding. But even from a scientific point of view, when contraception is brought in large scale to a place where you don't have access to the kind of healthcare that people have in the West, where this whole contraception movement started. Because I believe that if you didn't have the kind of top-notch medical services and medical healthcare that you have here, it would be very much exposed that there are so many problems with contraception, because people have side effects. But when you have side effects here, what do? You go to your doctor, and then they remove it. If it's an implant that is giving you problems. If it's an IUD that you're feeling uncomfortable with, you go, they remove it. If it's a pill, you just stop it. But then in Africa, the biggest problem that the contraception crowd is having is that people are reacting to these contraceptives, and there is not any doctor in a walking distance or anybody to call and make an appointment with. And so these women are rejecting it on their own. We've had Strings Attached. Part of the story in Strings Attached is the fact that we found out that there were places where IPPF, International Planned Parenthood Federation, and Marie Stopes were going and giving women these contraceptive drugs and devices, and the women were reacting to it. Some were telling us that even things like they've had the contraception and immediately they started to bleed, and they were bleeding for months. Some of them were having a loss of libido. I mean, there were all these things that women in the village, remote places, and they didn't know how to help themselves, because some of these contraceptive drugs and devices, you have to have a medical personnel take it out. So they don't have the money to take it out. So that story, please watch Strings Attached and make my life easy. But really, really, it's some of these things, you cry just listening to them. They can't speak English. They cannot read the inserts or know the side effects of these things. They were not fully informed. So even that is questionable as to how these things are being spread. So in Africa, really, long and short of it is that even the data is there that the African continent is where in the world of everybody we have the highest discontinuation rate. There's something like that. I didn't know before I started doing the research. But we have the highest discontinuation rate. So you can come and spread your contraception that is worth $50 billion. But then if you come back in the next 4 months, much of that is gone, because many of the women just say, we don't want it. And many times they say they don't want the contraception, not because they don't know what it is, but many of them are saying it's causing me problems. Some are saying, well, my husband is not even around, so what do I need contraception for? But our donors are like, just keep it, just in case. So it's just ridiculous, even the messaging surrounding that. So we do have a lot of issues, but there are people who accept contraception or who think it's okay, like people in the Anglican Church. But then, even if you think it's okay, it's one thing, but then you might then have it and see the real dangers of it and the damages that it causes to women. And all the things that are attached to it, and that has made it a disaster on the continent. People are using contraception in some places, but many times it's not a huge success story. It's not a huge success story. Yes. One more. Okay.
Okay, I have two. But what type of organizations do you want to see in Africa instead of the ones currently providing this funding? And the fun question is, what is your favorite prayer?
Oh, this is the kind of question I like. What kind of organization do I want to see in Africa? 3W. Well, I want to see organizations that really promote the human dignity when it comes to healthcare. Yes, I want organizations that would respect our culture, our customs, will come in with a full understanding that the human dignity should be the center of care. When it comes to other things apart from healthcare, I want to see more educational style or themed programs being spread across the continent. Of course, by UNICEF data, we have the lowest education enrollment rate, so you will have millions and millions of children who are school-aged but who don't have access to any kind of education or any form of education. So we're finding out that we are having or raising this generation of people in some places, not everywhere. Of course, we do have schools, we have universities and all that, but it's expensive. So when you have a lot of poverty or in places where they're very disadvantaged, you just end up with a population that is uneducated. And how is that going to better our society? We need people, the Africans themselves to raise themselves out of poverty by being educated, by being well instructed, by being well trained to be able to build the world around them. It's not the donor who is going to come and build the world around us. We need our own doctors and nurses and teachers, and that has to come from local communities. But the first thing that needs to happen is that education has to be brought in and made accessible to people, so that people can get what they need in order to get trained and to raise their own communities. What is my favorite prayer? I would say the Rosary. Am I allowed to say that? Yeah, I love the Rosary, and there's a lot of things in my life that has come about at various points of my life, and usually happens in connection with Our Lady, with the Rosary. One of my favorite places, I was discussing it with Helen today, is Fatima. Same with hers as well. So it's amazing the kind of things that, that have happened in my life because of, Our Lady. There was a time I found myself so depleted just doing all this work on neo-colonialism. This was around 2016, 2017. I just felt, I'm really, really tired. So I just packed up all my things and went to Fatima. There was I just took leave from work for a week, and I said, I might be back by the end of the week, but I'm going somewhere. So I jumped on a plane and went to Portugal, stopped in Lisbon, took a bus, went to Fatima. I had no plans. I wasn't with any group or anything. I had just booked a hotel. So every morning I just come out, I walk around, I go to the chapel, to the basilica, I'll be there for Mass, we'll say the Rosary. By the end of that week, I was so energized, so empowered that I came out of it and immediately started writing the first part of Target Africa. And I'll tell you one other thing that will make you know how cool a person I am. I wrote Target Africa on my iPhone, all of it, the entire book, start to finish. It took me 7 months though, but all of it was completely written on my iPhone, chapter by chapter. It took 7 months because I had a publisher who was going through the chapters with me, so we were going back and forth, working on the references, but every single part of it was written on the iPhone. And it's not me, really, I'm not cool. It's because I believe it's part of that Fatima experience that, I think Our Lady just wanted to show me how much of her work this is. Who writes a book on an iPhone, for goodness sake? So that's it, yeah, that's it. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm back again. I got ahead of myself earlier. But as I said previously to this, please check us out. Come get one of Uju's books, have her sign it, learn a little bit more about us and all the services that we are providing to women in the area. And at another event we had a while ago, I heard someone say that when Microsoft came out, now everyone who looks back is like, I should have totally gotten in on that. And, they didn't, and now Microsoft is like huge. Well, this is your opportunity to get on to something that is going to be huge. I believe that 3W is the future of women's healthcare. Thank you.
there's one more thing. Just one very brief thing, sorry. Anybody who is on Instagram, you can actually find me on Instagram and follow some of these, like, things happening in the future, because a lot of the things that I talk about, they're things that already that I kind of flag on Instagram. So if you take my full name, just search on Instagram and find me. I'm also on Twitter, of course. That one is quite interesting. That's where we get to fight all the battles. So find me on any of those 2 social media platforms. Watch Strings Attached, and I honestly really, really want you to watch Strings Attached because I think it all brings it to life. Yeah, and read Target Africa, of course. Pray for me. Thank you.